Welcome back to the Reboot Era, where we turn setbacks into smarter comebacks. I'm your host, Dre Jankowski, and the next few episodes will be marking the close of Season 1 of this podcast. I'll be wrapping up on September 30th as I prepare to step into the new role of Head of Program Management and Product Operations at a company I am not mentioning yet. Before we kick off today's episode, I wanted to share something that really worked for me. I've been using jobhire.ai in my own job search, and within a couple of weeks, I had 5 interviews lined up and 2 offers on the table. I may have even accepted one of those offers, but more on that later. What I love is that they're so confident in the process that if you don't land an interview in 15 days, you get your money back. And throughout September 2025, I've partnered with them to give you 30% off with my code DRAY30, DRAY30. So if you're in the middle of your own reboot, this is worth checking out. Today's conversation is all about rebooting how you interview. I'm joined by Browne, author, speaker, and longtime HR leader, as well as Barbara Limmer, an HR veteran turned executive career coach. Both have been laid off twice, both rebuilt, and together they co-wrote Interview Speak, a playbook for translating what interviewers are really asking so you can answer authentically and land the role. We'll cover post-layoff mindset, how to prep when you only have 24 hours, and one Amazon interview prep story you'll want to steal. Let's dive in.
Hi, I'm Browne. I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a coach, I'm a trainer, and my focus is to help people be more successful at this job or at your next job. And I've been in corporate human resources for many years with global tech companies, so I know what goes behind the scenes. And I've written books on how to increase your salary and also what to do if you get laid off. Because like many people, I've been laid off twice in my career. And both times it was miserable, but I made a career pivot afterwards. In addition, I've written for Forbes. I've been quoted as a business expert in major publications like Cosmo, Family Circle, and USA Weekend. And I am here to help people get their next job. And I'm also here with my wonderful co-author, Barbara. So, Barbara, what about you?
Hi, I'm Barbara Limmer, and I've had a couple of different careers. The first half of my career was in human resources in a variety of industries where I was always involved in recruiting, interviewing, hiring, referring candidates to hiring managers, and making job offers. Then I made a career pivot into the career coaching side, where I started with an international business school in their career management center. And then after getting laid off 8 years later, I became a private career coach contracting with a variety of consulting companies. And I've always been involved in either real job interviews or mock interviews where I was coaching people and giving specific feedback on what made their answers good, what could make them better. And that's kind of what started this idea for our book. And by the way, I've also been laid off twice. So unfortunately, it's a pretty common thing out there.
I love it. And that means, this podcast definitely resonates with all types of people. I've had, very early, just graduated individuals join the podcast. And now I've had, I can say the other end of the spectrum with people who have lived a fruitful career and experienced layoffs, but now also written about it. And that's why we're here today to talk about Interview Speak, a book that the two of you wrote together, which that's a little bit different. Could we start with maybe, why? Why did you write a book? And then also, why'd you write it together?
Well, I'll start with why we wrote the book. I mean, again, in my career, I've realized that most people walk away from job interviews thinking that they did well, and that's not always the case. So, and in my mock interviews with people, I've often had to translate for them, here's what the real question behind the question is. And then when they hear that, it's like the light bulb goes off and they say, now I know how to answer it. So I've had this idea for the book for a very long time. And I'm very good friends with Laura. We've known each other for a number of years. She's written several other books. I had never written a book before. And through her encouragement, we decided to do it together. And I think that if Laura hadn't encouraged me, the book wouldn't exist.
Now, okay, I want to add that Barbara said it very nicely that I encouraged her, and that's actually not true. I really bugged her. So we have known each other for many, many years. We've known each other since our kids were little, and they're now out of college, and they're on their own job journey. And so a couple of years ago, I thought, this would be a really good book, and I really kept bugging Barbara until I think she finally couldn't stand it anymore, and she agreed and decided, "Okay, we'll go ahead and write it." And honestly, it was really, really fun. Now this is my 12th book. So I've written books with other people before, and it's always different. So Barbara didn't sort of know what to expect, and so I think she thought it would be a lot faster and easier than it really was. But it took us 2.5 years because it took us a while with the publisher. And even though after we got what we thought was the best book possible, then we worked with the publisher who gave us great ideas, and then they do something interesting. They sent it out to reviewers. So before we were done with the book, people reviewed it and gave us suggestions, and then we changed the book. So that's why it took 2.5 years. But to me, it was really fun, and it's still fun working with Barbara and going on podcasts together.
Wow. That 2.5 years is a long time. It's half a college degree right there. And that's awesome that you stayed friends. I've heard people go through situations like starting a business. I imagine writing a book is similar where at the end of it, you're like, you know what, we're gonna publish it, but we're done. I don't really want to talk to you as much. Were there moments for the people who are listening? I'm sure they're gonna have questions. Some of the questions I'm gonna ask you, they're just what would someone who's listening to this be like? Oh, I wish they would have asked that, right? And we may use it, we may not. But were there moments where you're like, Barbara, I know what to do next. Stop fighting me.
Go ahead, be
So I would
honest.
say no. No, no, but what I would say is there were times when both of us were on a ledge. Like, I can't do this anymore. Okay, Barbara's nodding. And we would have to talk each other off the ledge, not because of the book, but because of the publisher. And our publisher is wonderful. I mean, just absolutely fabulous. But sometimes they would ask us to do things and we're like, what? I don't think so. And so again, sometimes I was the one on the ledge. Sometimes Barbara was the one on the ledge. But we ended up coming back, no, no, no. This is making the book better. And, it is worth the extra time and energy to put into it. What do you think, Barbara?
And I would add, I think one of the reasons we work really well together is number one, we understand each other's strengths. Like, would you believe I don't even really see myself as a writer? To me, it's about the content. I'm passionate about this topic, but Laura is a writer. So she's done a lot of the creative parts of the book. And so we understand each other's strengths, number one. Number two, we kind of set up a ground rule from the beginning. I don't even remember if it was explicit or just implied. Total transparency, total honesty with each other, which we've carried through this whole time. And that's why we were still as good of friends, if not better friends than we were when we started after having gone through this experience together.
Wow. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's a powerful message for anyone who might be considering something like this, whether it's writing a book, whether it's starting a business, or maybe just like raising, co-parenting a dog. I think there's lessons to be learned all around. But I do want to focus all about your book today and use the majority of our time together to talk about that. And so if one of you or both of you could do a part of like, what is it about? What is it for? I've read it. I loved it. And I will say before you spill the tea about it, the pieces where I'm going through the interview process now. So this was so eye-opening and helpful. Now I'm someone who's seasoned. I've worked at amazing companies like Amazon, Fortune 10 companies. I've gone through the interviews. I've done loops. I've done so much with answering different questions. I think even last night I was prepping for an interview and I was just talking, and sometimes I ramble, but I can get the point that I need to across. So I'm reading this as someone who's not like, I don't know what to do. What's going wrong? I have terrible interviews. I'm reading this as someone who's like, no, I interview very well. And there were things in here that I was like, I've never thought to pivot and utilize this question as a way to highlight my strengths. I answer honestly and say, this is what I bring to the table. So I love that piece. But with that, could you talk about what is this book about and who's it for?
Well, it's for a very wide audience. I mean, people at all different levels. I've worked with new college grads up to executive VP and C-suite clients. Also people in all different job functions, all different industries. So that's the target audience. What makes this book unique is that the theme throughout is developing your own authentic answers, being real. We don't give hundreds of interview questions, best answers to all the interview questions for people to memorize. I've seen those books out there. I've heard those memorized answers. I typically call people on it when I hear, yeah, I read that book too. Give me your real answer. So what we do is, again, we translate these questions to give people a window into here's what the interviewer is looking for. So it helps candidates kind of get out of their own head and think about what is it that they want the interviewer to know about them, especially now that they know what the interviewer is really looking for.
Yeah, and I want to go back to, Dre, something that you said. You said that you want to show up honestly, which absolutely you should. You need to show up honestly. And again, that's something that we emphasize in the book. We want people to prepare, we want people to think about stories and things like that so they can show up honestly and authentically there. And the other thing I would add is, again, interview books, when you go on an interview, you're so focused on you. You're so focused on, I have to have, the answer, I have to do this, I need to get the job, things like that. Our book really helps you to think about what's going on in the interviewer's head. And something I'm going to add is interviewers are scared because they want to make sure that if they either move you to the next stage or they hire you, that you're going to do a good job. So when you sometimes think about, oh, this person is afraid, I need to help them not be so afraid. I need to convince them that I'm going to love this job. And people are going to say, wow, I'm so glad that you hired Laura. So if you can think about it from the other side, it can help you to have a better interview.
Yeah. I think all that's so valid because I've not been on the other side where I've really hired a lot of people, but I've definitely talked to so many hiring managers and then later worked for them. And that's what comes up because I ask those questions. And it's not this blueprint of this book being, how do I answer this question and give you that, here's the perfect answer, let me recite it. Absolutely not. But I loved that you do call attention to the fact of, here's what the person in this example said, and here's how it could have been better, right? And highlighting what those maybe key words or key phrases are that you can identify from the question and then recite in your answer. And I think that that's so helpful because there's so many questions, you'll never be able to memorize them all for sure. But I think that theme that you can gather from, 20 questions essentially are asking this exact same thing. Hopefully you can't hear my dog in the back. She's passionate about interviews.
Well, and here's the thing, though. I mean, there are, I don't know, thousands and thousands of questions that you could be asked. And every interviewer has their own favorite questions. And we talk about how interviewers are different. You never know what kind of interview you're going to get. But the point is, there are some very common questions that everybody can prepare for. And then once you prepare for those, then you'll feel more comfortable and it'll be easier. And there are also some themes that you should be prepared for. And once you can do that, knowing that you could get some weird outlier questions, you'll still do a better job on the interview.
Well, and one of the things we show in the book is there's a topic, let's say, and there are a variety of questions that could be asked in that. In fact, we include an appendix in the back with additional questions on that topic. So the thinking behind that is training candidates to recognize when a question is about a topic, maybe they didn't prepare for that exact question, but they've thought about that topic and how it pertains to their experience, and they have a story ready.
Yeah, some of the best advice, I think, mirrors what this book was all about that I've ever received. So when I was working at CVS Health, I had a amazing manager and mentor. His name was Michael Casey. I love him. I actually just reached out the other day and I was just like, I talk about you frequently now. And, this is 10 years ago or so. And he told me when I was interviewing, I was like, I want this new job at CVS. I was like, how do I prepare? And he was just like, listen, I've worked high up at a lot of different companies. Best thing to do is come up with 5 to 8, job examples, what you did, how you added value, etc. He said, then take flashcards and write them all out into essentially the STARS method, which he didn't say the STARS method, but he said what you want to do is do the situation, the task, the action, the result, and then the value essentially that you added by doing that. And he said, if you can do that and write those out and essentially memorize those things, right? Any question you get, you can kind of hear what they're asking for, pick one of those scenarios, and then utilize it to answer the question accurately and showcase your abilities. And I was like, this is lovely. And so as I was going through your book, I would pause and I'd be like, how would I answer this question just to see? And then I would be like, ooh, how did I do versus your example versus, what the perfect or better answer would be. And I sometimes fell into that perfect. I was like, ooh, I'm really great. And then other times I was like, ooh, I gotta brush up on the old skills.
Well, I mean, you raise an interesting point because what I just said earlier about a topic has many potential questions that could be asked around that topic. The same is true from the candidate's standpoint. If you, and I totally agree with you, Dre, having several success stories ready. And then it's almost like you can reverse engineer those stories and say, well, what skills of mine are displayed in this story? So you've got this one story that you can use for a variety of different interview questions.
I'll tell you another story, but I'm going to wait until I can ask you a question. And I want to see if you guys like it, if you would hire, if you'd be like, we want this guy. So let's dive in a little bit to maybe an example of how this book, right? A lot of people, they read the back of the books. They're like, is this book for me? They hear about a book and they're like, okay, my friend recommended it, but I don't know if I want to listen to it. So the first chapter, which I really liked, and I took some notes, is really describing how candidates believe they think they nailed it. And Barbara mentioned this earlier, right? We think we nailed it, but then there's this like perception misalignment. And it's like the interviewer did not think that you nailed this, right? The hiring manager was like, you missed the ball, but you walked away calling your friends and being like, dude, I think they want me. They loved me. So could you give any real world example from either of you, whether it was yourself and you were the person who had the bad perception, or you're the interviewer and you were like, hey, I hated their answers and they were so confident in them. We don't need to use names, but anything that you could think of that you could just share, because I think that will speak to the content you give in your book. That was lovely.
Well, I'll start off with one. Well,
yeah, because I've got
thinking.
so many different that I could use.
So I'm thinking
Laura,
about a time that I interviewed somebody for a job, and she was terrible. I'm not going to say what the answers were, but she just kept focusing on one area that was not connected to the job I was hiring for. But she was a super nice person. And so I didn't want to be mean or anything. So I went along and I was really pleasant and thank you so much and we'll get back to you. And the whole time I thought, yeah, you're not getting this job. But I was a nice person and she was a nice person. And I'm sure she left thinking, wow, that was great. Because the alternative would have been, that's not the job that I'm hiring for, and those are not the skills that I want, and it would have ended it after 10 minutes. So again, sometimes it's the interviewer is really nice, and sometimes also I've had other ones where it was sort of I kept going, and I'm just not sure. And I sort of like the person, and I sort of like this, but I didn't like that, but I kept going. And then at the end, then maybe the next day I talked to some colleagues. I'm like, nah, there just wasn't enough good there. There was some good and bad. So I've seen it a couple of different ways. What about you, Barbara?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I'm thinking about how important it is to do whatever you can to build rapport with the interviewer, because then they will forgive you. If you only have 80% of the qualifications, somebody else has 110% of the qualifications and knows it, they're not necessarily the ones that are going to get the job offer. So I've interviewed people where, oh my God, it's like getting blood out of a turnip trying to get answers out of them. But on paper, they had all of the criteria my hiring manager wants. So I'll tell them, and then the hiring manager interviews them. And because they have a similar personality type, they end up loving them. Or the reverse, where I've interviewed someone who just went on and on and on, incredibly bubbly, but also sort of bouncing off the walls. I thought they were too much. Well, they weren't going to be working for me. The hiring manager ended up loving them because they'd be a perfect match for their team. And one personal example I remember where I was the interviewee and I showed up for the interview and they didn't even ask me a whole lot of questions. They were drawing the whole org chart on the whiteboard and all this stuff. And I walked away thinking, they didn't get to learn much about me. I'm sure I'm not going to get the job. And then when I followed up to find out the next step in the interview process, they said, we're going to be FedExing you an offer letter. Like, wait, what? So it's very difficult to know how you've done. And as we say in the book, there are people who, most people walk away thinking they did incredibly well and are shocked when they don't get the job offer. And then other people are surprised. There are a lot of interviewers out there that put on sort of the poker face, and you walk away really not knowing how you did. And then you end up working with that person who ends up having a great personality. It's just that's the persona they put on when they're interviewing people.
Yeah, I definitely think there's people out there who do well, walk away being like, I did well. They know it. There's people who walk in there and they're like, it was, I just woke up 5 minutes before the interview. I wasn't prepared. And they know. They're like, listen, I BS'd my way through that interview. I think a majority of people, though, tend to fall into that middle ground. And I don't have the statistics, but after talking to so many people on this podcast and looking at all these layoff numbers, there's people out there being like, I thought I did everything right, but now I'm questioning it because the interviewer or the hiring manager just said, thank you so much for your time. We'll be in touch. And you're like, no inkling one way or the other on like how I did, nothing. Do you have any advice for people going through this tough time? Hopefully they go get your book, but if they don't, what would you say to kind of give them a little bit of like safety, a little bit of security, saying, when you walk away from an interview, what should you do? Should you think about it for the next 15 hours? Do you lose sleep over it? What should you do to kind of help your mindset and be healthy?
15 hours, no. 15 minutes, yes. So, I think it's important. We actually include a post-interview self-evaluation in the appendix of the book. So I do think it's important to do a bit of a self-assessment. What do I think I did really well? What could I improve? What do I want to do differently on my next interview? Did I prepare as much as I think I could have? So take the time to do that and then set it aside and move on to focus on your next conversations. And the other thing I would tell people, I have talked to so many people who they get really down in the dumps. I've applied to so many jobs. How come I'm not getting invited to interviews? Or I've gone on first interviews, I'm not getting follow-ups. And my message is, you know what? It's not always about you. Don't take it personally. There's a slew of problems out there in terms of job search methods, meaning online jobs don't always exist, number one. Number two, just because you apply doesn't mean your resume is getting seen by a human or AI. So focus on conversations, and the more conversations you have on your schedule, the more you're going to feel good about yourself because people will want to help you. So don't focus on job applications, focus on conversations.
Yeah, and let me add to that. Again, I've been through the situation where you send out a whole bunch of resumes, nothing happens, or you do a couple of interviews. And being on the inside in corporations, just because somebody did a great job in the interview and the manager likes them doesn't mean they're going to get hired. One time, they actually offered me a job and then pulled back and said, oh, financial, we've changed our minds. That had nothing to do with me. And I've seen others where there was an internal candidate, and it didn't matter if the external candidate was perfect, the internal candidate was going to get it, but they had to put it out there and interview some external candidates. So going back to what Barbara said, think about it, learn from it for the next time, but don't let it make you crazy because it really isn't about you. This really is a numbers game. But also adding to what Barbara said, I would think about one time when I got a job. I didn't get a job because I applied to it. I actually was out of work, and I actually contacted people I knew, and I said, let's have a cup of coffee, either a virtual coffee or let's just meet and have coffee. And I said, I just want to catch up with you. I want to find out, what do you do? What do you like about your job? And then how can I help you? So it wasn't, oh my gosh, get me a job. It was a good conversation. And one of those conversations, a woman said, oh my gosh, we're going to be putting together a job and you would be perfect for it. And I hadn't even thought about working for her company. And that's the job I got because I reached out to somebody I knew and just started having conversations. And to me, that's got to be part of the job hunting right now.
Yeah, all of that's awesome and I'm glad that we talked about that last piece, because what is a reoccurring theme on this podcast is around the power of your network, right? And there was one person who came on here who said, your network is your net worth. And I loved that. I was like, I have never thought about it that way because I've always just been this outgoing person who loves to chit chat and meet people. But doing just that right now in this economy and this job market of like reaching out to old friends, reaching out to connections. And for those who didn't do it while they were working, while they thought they were kind of safe, it's unfortunate because they're a little bit behind, but it doesn't mean you can't. And I've shown this multiple times in the podcast. Reach out to a stranger, ask them for a phone call. Mine just happens to be recorded and shared. And now you've met all these people. And I even gave them this free, how do you keep in touch with people who you reached out to, and set yourself a monthly, a quarterly, annual, just reach out, touch base. Hey, we haven't talked in a minute. Do you want to hop on a call type of thing? So I think that's really important. I did want to pivot slightly. There's this theme, and you guys touch on in your book. There's this theme around not preparing, not doing your homework, not learning about the company. And I honestly have only been asked maybe twice ever in all of the interviews I've had, can you tell us about our company? And I'm like, I prep for this. So yeah, actually I can. But I'm also not the spokesperson, so I don't know if what I'm about to say is right. I'm reading, it's from your website, so I'm hoping it's right. How important is that from what you've seen? Is it one of those things where it's good to know what you're interviewing for and what the company does? Or is it something that, like, going into this interview, you should be able to tell us, high level, what is this company doing? How would you add value to it based off of your skill sets to our company and what we do?
So if I could start off. So when somebody is interviewing you, they're really looking for three things. They're looking, first of all, can you do the job? And that's the easy one. That's the one that we really focus on. That, yeah, I have these skills. And then they're looking to find out, can you fit the company culture? So they want to find out, like, how did you work with people at your last job? But the third thing, and people don't think about this very often, is they're looking to see, do you want this job? Not do you want a job? I know you want a job because you're interviewing, but do you want this job? Are you excited about this job? Are you motivated? Or am I going to give you the job and 2 weeks later you're going to be bored? So you need to convince me you're super excited about working for this job and this company. And that, to me, is why you need to do the research, not just go to the website. Read some articles about this company. Look at their posts. So look at the posts of the person that you're interviewing with on LinkedIn. I mean, so you need to be able to refer to those things to show I'm interested and I am enthusiastic. So what else would you say, Barb?
And absolutely. And Dre, you're right. I don't think it's very common for an interviewer to ask a question directly, how much do you know about our company? I mean, it's possible that in a sales or marketing role, you might be asked, what do you think of our current branding and what would you do differently? But for most people, they won't be asked directly. But it's about knowing what the employer needs so that you can match your skills and experience to their needs. So the preparation helps you tailor your answers better to fit that job and that company. And to the extent you can do reconnaissance on who your interviewer is by looking at their LinkedIn profile at the very least, then again, you can use some of what you've seen there to build rapport and to customize your answer. It's kind of like, I give the example in the book, back when I was very early on, I was interviewing salespeople. There's the old question, see this pen, sell it to me. Anyone who started right in talking about the features and benefits of the pen clearly showed me they were not in tune with what makes for a good salesperson. Instead, you need to say, what is it that you're looking for in the pen? And then I can tailor my speech to what it is you are looking for. The same is true in job interviews. The more I know about what you need, the more I'm able to customize my presentation, if you will, to fit those needs.
Yeah, I actually just talked about the pen thing the other day with someone, and I was like, they were talking about sales, and I was like, the old, can you sell me a pen?
Yeah.
And I was like, I feel like it's not about the pen. It's
Right.
about me. Everyone needs
Right.
a pen, and I don't know. Sometimes I think simple things, needing a car, a house, like everyone needs them. Everyone wants them. I don't need you to sell me the damn house. I need you to hear me. Honestly, half the time I just want a friend to be on the lot with me when I'm looking at a car. Like, I don't need you to tell me how much something is underneath this engine. I wanted the car when I came on. I knew what car I wanted. Like, you're not selling me anything.
Yeah.
You're just being a good person, and you're here with me as part of this journey while I'm about to sign my life away for the next 6 years on a car loan. So I love
And
it.
you know what? I think the same is true in job interviews. What we were saying, it's not about you. It's the same thing in the interview, which may sound contradictory. It's not about you, it's about them. What is it that they need, and how can you help them with those needs?
Yeah.
And how
And
can
it's
you
hard.
clearly help them to see it? Because it might be obvious to you. But again, in the stories or in connecting, hey, I saw, that you folks are pivoting to this or you're moving to this. That's what I'm really good at. You're connecting the dots for them so they don't have to. So they clearly see this person really would be a good fit.
Yeah, and it's hard in this market right now. I mean, the first few you get, right? I took 2 to 3-ish months to really work on this podcast and work on giving free resources out to people and making those connections and networking. And then I wanted to share that journey of like, I'm not applying to jobs right now, but the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks at this point, I have been applying. And weirdly enough, I've gotten quite a few interviews. And that's the thing, is like, the first few are exciting. And you're like, I read about your company and I could give you a presentation on it and I love it. And here's what I could add to your company. This is why I add value. But I can see how if I'm still doing this in 6 months, it's like, man, I just need a job. That's where I'm at. It's hard to, I can do it. I could go put it into ChatGPT. I could tell you about your company. I could tell you about how my skill sets align, but I just need a job. You called me because my resume aligns. You know that I align. You saw something. So can I just focus on the question and give you my answer and just throw me a lifeline? Throw me a job, not a lifeline. I just want a job. Just pay me.
And so let me add to
You've-
that. Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead. No,
Well,
go
I
ahead.
mean, the more you prepare, the easier it's going to get. That same level of preparation, you're not going to do 6 months later. You can use the stories and all the prep work you did, you can use for more than one interview. And the other thing is, job search burnout is a real thing. There are articles out there about that. And my antidote for that is think about what you can control. You cannot control whether you're going to see a job of interest that you want to apply to, whether you're going to be invited to interview, whether you're going to get a call back for a second interview. None of that stuff is in your control. What you can control is what we talked about earlier. Identify the people you want to reach out to and reconnect with or have a conversation with. And if you focus on what you can control, that does wonders for your mental state during what can be a very difficult process.
Well, let me add to that. So let's talk about, yes, you talked about frustration. And also when we talked earlier about getting laid off, I mean, you get laid off, it's horrible. You feel shamed. I mean, the first time I was laid off, I didn't want to tell anybody. I certainly didn't want to reach out to my contacts. I mean, it was embarrassing. And so, first of all, just recognizing that's what everybody goes through. So then you have to deal with it in your own way. And you have to think about, okay, how can I get back out there? Not just sending out applications, but again, reaching out to people and a friend of mine said what she did is she reached out to the 4 nicest people she knows, because then she knew that they would be really nice, saying, oh, you lost your job. Let me help you. And then she reached out to other people, but recognizing that it is going to be hard, especially in the beginning. And then maybe you'll get excited. And then if it's still going on, then you'll have another slump. And just being kind to yourself, because it is a really difficult situation. So don't beat yourself up. No, lots of people have gone through it, and you can go through it too.
Yeah. And that's really great, because what I found is that as I go through this, you're absolutely right. When I have gone these interviews, these people interviewing me understand. And I don't think they're sitting there giving me a pity party, but they're like, yeah, it's part of business. And the important piece to us isn't that, at least the companies I've interviewed for, it's not that you took 5 years off, if that's what you chose to do. It's not that you did get laid off. We don't think that you're the problem. We can all see the headlines. We know your company did layoffs. It's more about like, during that time, what have you done to grow, right? And I like to think that this cool thing I'm documenting is an awesome story, and because it's like, hey, I stayed busy. I also got some certifications. I stayed relevant. I educated myself. And it's, quick answer about what I've been doing in my free time since I've been laid off. And now let's get back to the value I could add, because I'm ready to come back to a company. And I think my little story resonates with people. But not everyone does that. It's hard to talk about it because it gets discouraging, and you do have that kind of almost shame that you're like, I didn't ask to be laid off. That's the hardest part. We all get there.
Well, and
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, that reminds me of a very common question. Why did you leave your last job? Or I know your company announced layoffs. Tell me more about what prompted your departure. And I always used to hate when people would just say, oh, I was laid off. And I would say that would leave me in the dumps. Like, wait a minute. Use what we call the negative sandwich. Start with a positive. I really enjoyed my time there. I got to build these great skills and had some great successes. And then the middle part of the sandwich, the negative, is here's what prompted your departure, which typically had nothing to do with you. There was a reorg, there were cost control measures, and unfortunately, my position was impacted. And then you have to give the other half of the sandwich, the positive side. And now what I'm looking for is this, or now what I'm doing is this. And you have to show that excitement about what's next as opposed to the doldrums of, oh, I was laid off.
Yeah. And that's hard for some people, right?
Yeah. You have to work through that.
Yeah. There's an aspect of, while this book is amazing, there is this personality aspect of like, if you're just this dull person who walks through life and maybe are very introverted and, it's hard for you to be excited. Maybe you are. And when you talk, you're not. It's that person has a harder time, I think, than the person who can, just be this bubbly personality who walks into a coffee shop and will meet 5 people instantly. And you're just like, how did you meet them? Oh, we were standing in line. They actually bought my coffee, which weirdly enough, like that happens to me. I went line dancing last night. This is my first time trying. And I went by myself, walked into this bar, big empty floor. There was a handful of people there. And I was like, am I in the right place? Like I heard there's line dancing lessons. And they were like, yeah, it's going to start soon. And they like called in and they were like, okay, if you're here for line dancing, come to the floor. And I was just like, okay, I'm just going to jump up there. And I got in right in the middle. And then I realized very quickly, I have no idea what I'm doing. Line dancing, it's a lot harder than I thought. I can't remember. As soon as we turn and face a different wall, I was like, what is the dance moves? I have no idea. So, I love to talk to people, and I networked in the middle of it. And now I'm going to go back and I met 4 people who are like, I come every Wednesday. And I was like, I'm going to be part of your Wednesday group now. Don't worry, I'll be there.
You know what? I do want to differentiate, though. There's 2 different things. Being bubbly and outgoing and extroverted is something totally different than being positive. You can be positive and still be yourself. So, saying, and here's what I'm looking at doing next, or here's why I'm interested in your job and your company. There are ways to end on a positive and still be yourself. Don't try and be someone that you're not, because that isn't going to work.
Yeah. And I just want to add, obviously, you're an extrovert, and I'm an extrovert, and I get that. I'd be out line dancing too. That sounds like fun. But for the introverts that are listening, that that being overly bubbly or whatever doesn't always work well in interviews, because some interviewers will be like, oh, this person is fake or they're too much. So again, you really need to be yourself. And I know plenty of introverted people that have gotten jobs, and maybe they work for another introverted manager who's like, oh, this is good. This person is calm. This person takes the time to make decisions. So again, recognize your strengths, focus on the strengths, and come across as positive, whether you come across as bubbly positive or calm positive, to make sure, again, they know that you're excited about joining and helping them.
Yeah, and I thank you for clarifying that, right? Because that's my perspective and how I go through my life, right? And those are my challenges that I deal with. Is sometimes I'm a lot. I'm not calm enough. I have the answer. I'm like, I got it. I know what to do. But it's important, and what people who are listening will get from this book is exactly that, right? It's not this one size fits all. It's tailored to a broad audience of people who can essentially understand, okay, I'm not extroverted. Maybe I'm not super positive right now, but what is a methodology that I can leverage, that I can utilize using those appendants in the back of the book to understand, okay, this is something I could work on. This is something I could leverage when I get asked those tough questions. And speaking of tough questions, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the later chapters, which I don't remember exactly which chapter it was, but it was around the interview stages and the tough questions that you get asked. And before I asked my question, I wanted to bring back the story that I mentioned I would share with the 2 of you. So interviewing at Amazon is it's no easy hill to climb, as some people may know. And I think I might have touched on this in a different episode in the podcast. But for the two of you, I made it to a final round and I was so excited. And my dog hates this story, so she might bark in the middle of it. But I made it to the final round and I was so excited. And they were flying me across the country from Rhode Island to Seattle. I was like, all right, I told my mom, I was like, we're in this interesting situation because I didn't pick a place to live. So we were renting a room. I was like, I got to nail this. I went to the library because we didn't have a printer where we were living. I went to the library. I prepped. I did the flashcards. I took it a step further. I made a presentation. I got every document I possibly could get and I could scratch out the numbers of certain things that were proprietary from other companies. I put it together and I then said, okay, here's project 1, 2, 3, all the way. I think I ended up having like 9 projects total. And I took Amazon's leadership principles and I took all of these star-based questions that you could think of. I think I took 50. And I said, okay, here's this project. In this project, I talk about these 3 leadership principles. Here's why or how I talk about them. And then also here's some questions that basically I think this project could answer. And so when I went into the interview and I prepared a top level, appendix of like, here's what you're about to see. I put in the sticky notes with colors and I said, like, here's a tab sticky note that's yellow. The yellow resonates to these leadership principles and it gives you these questions and essentially adds the value or shows the value that I would add. I then made, 8 copies. I had one for myself and every interviewer that I went on, I had a 7-round panel back to back to back. And every single person, they started and they were just like, they came in the room and they were like, why do you have folders? And I was like, this is for you. And they took the folder and they were skeptical. They're like, okay, but this is an interview. And I said, I know, don't worry about that. I kept mine closed. I didn't need to use it. And then they were like, okay, can you tell me about a time when? And I was like, perfect. If you open that, you're actually going to see on the purple tab, this question's asked. It talks about this leadership principle, which I think is great for this. And then I actually went through and I answered it. At the end, I said, that's for you to keep. Keep the folders. Which was then my nickname once I got that job because I unanimously got a yes across the board from every single interviewer, which is not hard, but that's what you need. And I did it. And they have those folders. And back in one of my storage units, I have that folder somewhere. And I always think about it. I'm like, man, that was quite a time in life. So, that was just one way that this book was essentially that. I wish I would have seen this book years ago because that was the prep I went through, but I didn't have ChatGPT. I didn't have a book that guided me. I was literally just spitballing. I was like, this is how I think I can leave the best impression possible and show that I know the company, show that I know the job, and boom. And I got it.
You had something that many people don't have, and that is Amazon gives you so much information in advance about the interview. The leadership principles, they tell you up front. They use the STAR method, which we talk about in the book. That's one framework for answering behavioral questions. There are others out there. So they give you these tremendous gifts that then allow you to prepare. You took the initiative to use that information to prepare. And it's not about the folders, it's about the work that you put in to create those folders. And then I think the impression you gave them, not only did you clearly perform really well in the interview, but you showed them, number one, how badly you wanted this job, going back to what Laura was saying. And number two, you are someone who does so much more than the bare minimum. You go above and beyond. So whether or not they even open those folders, they had that impression of you, and I'm sure that was part of why they wanted you on their team.
I love that story. That was absolutely, I've never heard anybody that did that. I've heard a lot of other stories. And again, when we talk about preparing, just what Barbara said, you showed, I want it, I can do it, I've done above and beyond, I will help you even more, hire me, and I will do even more of this. That sounds absolutely amazing.
Well, the question I have, thank you for that. I wanted to ask a question and get your feedback on not what I did, but a misstep, essentially, a lot of people take in adapting their answers for different frameworks or different situations as they're going through this. Is there anything that you could share, whether it be from your book or just, hey, here's a takeaway from the podcast? When you're going through different companies, you might have a company like Amazon who gives you that prep. You might have a company who's going to say, hey, do you have time tomorrow for an interview? And you're like, whoa, what job was this for again?
Well, two things. Number one, you need to I tell everyone, copy and paste every job you apply to into a Word document so that you have it. And then we show in the book how to deconstruct a job description so that you have not all the information like what Amazon gave you, but you have the information. They are telling you exactly what they need. So do you have to write up all this stuff? No, but you can at least think through every line on that job description. What if they ask me this? What if they ask me that? Other tidbit I would give you, because again, not everyone out there uses what we call behavioral interviewing. Give me an example of this. Some people ask, hypothetical, how would you handle this? And other people ask, general, how do you handle this? And my message to listeners and to the readers of our book is you can convert a general or hypothetical and still give a real example. So how would you handle this? You could say, you know what, I've actually lived through that before. Let me talk you through that. So just because a question is asked a certain way doesn't mean you can't convert it to give a real live example, which will always have greater impact because there's real pain behind it if you had to overcome obstacles and there's real results, instead of just saying, oh, hypothetically, here's what I would do, or in general, here's what I typically do. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and I would just add, again, you just gave the example that what if you get a message saying, hey, do you have time to meet tomorrow? And of course, you're going to say yes. So my answer is always prepare early. So if I have done just like, again, what you said before, Dre, that you've gotten some examples, gotten some stuff. Now I'm looking at, okay, now I can spend the next hour going through the job deconstruction and really taking a look at it. And now maybe I spend the next hour getting information about this company. But I already have the answers to general questions, and now I can tweak it. And so the more you can do in advance, before you even start interviewing, the easier it will be for you to actually make it specific to this job and this company.
Yeah, because then really the only questions you need to come up with is, why am I interested in this particular job? And if the job is similar to other jobs you've interviewed for, that's easy for you to answer. And why are you interested in our company? That's where that company research comes in.
Those answers I think were awesome. And this book, we could go on for days talking about the value that it adds. I hope people during this podcast were able to understand the value you'll get from reading a book like this. And if you didn't, watch the podcast like 5 times over because it's helpful and they gave a lot of it away. So there is a code, if you're listening to the whole thing, that you can leverage. We'll put it in the show descriptions where you can get, 45% off the book?
Yep, 45% off if you go to our publisher, Manning.
Yep. So if you heard that, that's how you get it. It will be in the show notes. You'll see it if you read the show notes. I'll put it on LinkedIn. Last question for the two of you. Are you open to people if they resonate with the story, if they hear, maybe if they want to ask you about writing a book and writing it with a person, writing with a partner? Could they connect with you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so what I would say, connect with us on LinkedIn, send us a message, say that you heard us on this podcast. We would love to answer any questions you have. And you can also reach me at my company, careercoffeebreak.com. But in any case, yeah, we would love to hear from your audience.
That's it for this episode. And as a reminder, this is one of the closing episodes for season 1 of the Reboot Era. But before you go, if you're job searching, don't spin your wheels like I did early on. JobHire.ai gave me the tools to land 5 interviews and 2 offers, and I may or may not have accepted one, but we'll get to that on a future episode. What's even better is their guarantee. If you don't land an interview in 15 days, you get your money back. And right now, throughout the month of September 2025, you can get 30% off with the code DRAY30, DRAY30. Head over to jobhire.ai, plug it in, and start making moves towards your next role. Thank you for being part of this journey as I launched the show during my own career transition. I'm excited to be starting a new role as the head of program management and product operations. And I'll be back with a fresh season 2 in January 2026. More stories, strategies, and conversations to fuel your reboot. In the meantime, grab Interview Speak from publisher Manning with 45% off code in the show notes. Connect with Laura and Barbara on LinkedIn. Tell them you heard them on the Reboot Era podcast. And you can also find Laura at careercoffeebreak.com. If this episode helped you, share it with a friend in interview prep mode and drop a quick review. It makes a huge difference. Until next time, keep rebooting, keep moving forward.